You're watching the alpha love stories, where fated mates, ruthless courts, and impossible choices collide. If you love powerful, heart-pounding romances, subscribe now and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. Now, lean closer, because this tale doesn't begin with once upon a time. It begins with silence, and a girl who used it like a sword. Most fairy tales begin with a promise. Nova's began with the closing of her mouth. 10 years old, bare feet on frost-numb stone, 6 brothers shivering as wolves under the pines, and a witch with a silver braid smiling like winter. That was the night Nova learned how much a single voice can cost. She hid her own inside her ribs and swore she would not spend it, not a vowel, not a whisper, until she bought back the lives of the boys who had taught her to climb trees and outrun storms. From that night forward, her words belonged to a vow. 9 years later, she was a servant the palace forgot to notice. They called her Star because she looked up more than she looked at anyone. She moved like the hush before snow, linen folded, floors polished, candles trimmed to clean flames. And when the world slept, she slipped through the bones of the castle to the royal gardens, where danger flowered as beauty, Wolfsbane, silver-veined, poisonous as regret. She harvested it with scarred hands, because braided into shirts it could tear a curse at the seam. Tonight, the garden wore its moonlight like a veil. Dew glassed the hedges. The fountain breathed mist that tasted of stone and mint. Far away, the ballroom roared, crystal applause, violins racing, 100 laughing mouths too full to say anything true. Here the air held still as a held note. Nova knelt among the Wolfsbane. Even through gloves, the sting found skin. She welcomed it. Pain kept her awake, kept her promise sharp. She cut only mature stems, nothing that would betray her harvest by morning, and slid them into a leather pouch that had once belonged to her father. She still remembered his hands when they were warm, how he'd lift her high enough to touch banners, how he'd crown her with leaves and tell her that every tree bowed to her kindness. A king should not die with his eyes empty, but that was how the witch left him, hollowed for the sake of her power, a lantern gutted for its flame. A night breeze turned the Wolfsbane silver. Nova paused and closed her eyes. She saw 6 boys, no, 6 men trapped behind gold animal eyes. Caden, eldest, steady as the North Star. Darian, all edges and unsaid jokes. Rowan, who carved flutes out of reeds and could make a storm listen. Eris, bright and sharp. Talon, the first to fight and the first to bandage. Liam, youngest, laughter that used to split the dark. 9 winters, and not one voice among them had said her name in human tongue. 5 shirts finished. The 6th lay under her straw mattress with a single sleeve missing, the fibers of it luminous when the candle burned low, as if moonlight had learned to hold itself. A twig gave way. A footstep found a truth. She was not alone. Nova melted against the shadow of an old yew. She made herself small enough for darkness to adopt. Footsteps approached, not the brisk, dutiful rhythm of patrol boots, but a measured stride, the kind you learn when corridors belong to you. The garden parted the way a sea might part for a legend. The Alpha King stepped into the moon. Damon Blackthorne wore the night as if it answered to him. No crown, no cloak, only a soldier's ease and a predator's quiet. The moon painted his cheekbones with cold silver and kindled old gold in his eyes. The wolf within him pressed close to the surface. Nova could feel it in the way the air noticed him, in how even the fountain seemed to hush. It wasn't the first time. In 8 years, she had learned the map of his moods, the crease between his brows when border reports soured, the softening at the corners of his eyes when a child's laughter grazed him like sunlight. She knew he asked for more ginger when the first frost stiffened the flagstones, knew he trained the rawest recruits himself, knew he hid tiredness the way a good king must, by carrying it alone. She had promised herself not to love the man behind the crown. Love didn't ask her opinion. He stood with his face turned up to the moon as if pleading with a god that didn't answer kings. For a heartbeat, Nova imagined stepping out, imagined the heat of breath between 2 people who suddenly know. Then she tasted the iron of her vow and stayed where silence kept her safe. "Your Majesty," a voice intruded, smooth, practiced, perfectly forgettable. Lord Brennan, the advisor who believed concern could solve anything it could name. The king didn't turn. I asked for solitude. Forgive me, sire. The guest of honor is insistent. She wishes to discuss an alliance. The word struck the garden like a bell. Alliance. In courts, that meant marriage the way thunder means rain. The king's jaw worked, not quite a wince, not quite a smile. You speak of prosperity, Brennan. The council speaks of mines and treaties. They forget people bleed between signatures. The queen is formidable, Brennan conceded, and generous. She believes you would make a partner of historic consequence. Nova's fingers dug crescents into her gloves. Queen. Not just any queen. The scent in the air, rose laid over metal, soured memory. She didn't have to see to know. There was only one woman whose beauty looked like winter wearing mercy. Lady Morwin of Silverrest, the witch who had turned a kingdom into her larder. Duty often requires sacrifice, Brennan said. I know the taste, Damon answered, and the wolf in him paced, restless, as if searching for a door in a wall that hadn't existed until now. The breeze shifted. He inhaled and stilled. His head turned slightly toward Nova's shelter. The amber in his eyes deepened, brightening to molten. Nova denied her own breath until the garden blurred. Moonlight made a net of pale on the path between them. Do you smell that? He asked. Medicinals, Brennan said quickly. The gardeners grow 100 strange things. The king stood motionless 1 heartbeat longer, then exhaled a dismissed memory and let duty turn his feet back toward noise and candle smoke. They left. The garden resumed. Nova's knees trembled with the aftershock of almost. She should have gone to the servant's wing. She should have ground the stems, soaked the fibers, braided the poison into thread that loved her brothers more than it hated the witch. But the word the advisor had used, alliance, clung to her like damp. If Morwin had truly come to court the Alpha King, then tonight might be the last night Nova had to warn him without dying for it. Warn him how? With a silence that had saved 6 lives and might damn a 7th? The ballroom yawned like a jeweled mouth. Nova slipped through the servant's door into a storm of color and perfume. Silks spilling like rivers, diamonds winking like small cruel suns, laughter that mistook volume for joy. The music pushed waves of dancers across the floor. At the far end, on a dais set like a cliff, the king stood, composed, courteous, lonely, the way mountains are lonely, visible, necessary, unreachable. Beside him, in a gown the color of spilled wine, Morwin smiled with lips that had learned to lie before they learned to kiss. Her hair was a crown of braided silver. A ruby ring cut the air with every gesture. Nova's stomach went weightless and then too heavy. The witch rested crimson-tipped fingers on Damon's sleeve like a claim. A younger servant passed with a tray. Nova stepped into the wake of the girl and tucked herself behind a column where the curtain pooled. Hidden theater, borrowed sightline. 9 years unspooled. A king's laugh going quiet. Doors closing one by one. Brothers whispering plans, then howling vows. The clearing where witchfire painted the trees an ugly blue. The words of the curse like ice water poured through fur. The desperate dream that came after, in which a grandmother's voice said 6 shirts, 6 years, 6 silences. Nova had made it 9. A vow gets heavier each year it is carried and more dangerous to set down. Morwin leaned in to murmur something. The king's mouth almost smiled and then didn't. Nova watched the witch's eyes, calculating, hungry. These eyes did not want a partner. They wanted a resource. They wanted to eat. Enough. Nova slipped away with the current of servants, followed the spine of passageways that stitched ballroom to kitchens to royal wing. The carpet swallowed sound. She passed portraits that looked down with oil eyes, past a window where the moon hung like a coin. She didn't realize she'd balled her hands into fists until the half-moons of her nails hurt through the gloves. At the turn to the king's study, 2 guards stood like punctuation. Irene, a quiet maid from the upper floors, approached with a tray. Decanter, 2 goblets. She moved in a way that said, I have done this 100 times. Her fingers, though, were stiff. In her pocket, the outline of a small vial. Morwin's coin always bought the same thing. Nova didn't think. She caught up a nearby platter of fruit and cheeses with the surety of a girl who knew how to disappear by looking essential. When Irene curtsied and passed, Nova followed in a servant's shadow. Inside the study, firelight softened the world to gold and coal. Shelves climbed the walls. Maps sprawled. A white shirt caught the fire at the king's throat. He looked younger without the crown, older without the distance. He didn't lift his gaze when Irene set down the wine. The vial's whisper was almost pretty as it poured. "Will there be anything else, Your Majesty?" Irene asked. Her voice snagged on the word majesty. "No," he said, weariness rubbing the edge off command. "Thank you." She turned and saw Nova. For a single startled heartbeat, all three of them were held in the same net of light. The maid, the king, the girl with a platter who didn't belong here. The goblet rose in his hand. Nova moved. A servant's clumsiness is an art when you need it to be. The back of her wrist brushed crystal. The world made the sharp sound of a risk becoming a choice. Red spread across the maps. Borders drowned in a storm of wine. The king was on his feet. Irene gasped. Nova went still. And then he looked at her. It was not the benign glance of a man sorting faces into usefulness. It was the sudden stilling of a hunter whose prey is not prey at all but an answer. Something in his eyes changed color. From amber to heat. From heat to a molten that remembered sun. The air shifted around him the way air shifts when lightning decides where to fall. "Who are you?" he asked. Wonder, not suspicion. Nova's mouth opened. The first word in 9 years crowded her tongue, frantic to be chosen. "Yours," her heart begged. Yours said everything in her that still knew how to speak. She tasted the metal of her vow and swallowed the word until it burned. Irene stammered something about cloths and fled, the door catching a draft like a flung cape. Silence fell thick and close. The fire sipped the room quiet. The king took a step, then another, as if drawn by a tide or a law he hadn't known he obeyed. "Star," he said, as if he'd always known the name the staff used, as if he'd been hearing it on the wrong wind for years. The word gentled his mouth. "It's you." She lowered her eyes. She was good at that. The way invisibility could wrap itself around bowed lashes and folded hands. He reached. 2 fingers touched under her chin and brought the world up with them. The warmth of his skin was startling in a life that had learned to be cold. Up close, he was not perfect. A pale scar notched his eyebrow. Weariness webbed the corners of his gaze. His breath smelled faintly of ginger and honeyed tea. Imperfections have a way of making desire more honest. "You never told me your name," he said, voice pitched for the small distance between them. Her lips shaped a breath that almost became a sound. She stepped back. If she didn't, her vow would break itself. If it broke, 6 wolves would never be men again. She bowed once, a servant's apology, and fled, the door giving way before her like a mercy. In the corridor, she pressed her spine to cold stone and tried to sort her breathing into something a body could live with. She watched the torchlight move on the opposite wall like a river, and counted to 100, and still did not feel safe from the memory of his eyes. By dawn, the 6th sleeve lay half-woven across her knees, fibers glowing where the candle breathed. Star's fingers ached and she welcomed it. The ache, at least, obeyed. The kitchen stirred with the usual clatter. Steel, steam, shouted orders like thrown ropes. Star kept her head down, knife steady, heartbeat pretending to be ordinary. She told herself he would forget her. Kings have wars to remember. The room changed temperature. The cook looked up so fast his cap slid. The scullions went still as knives. In the doorway stood Damon Blackthorne, no crown, no guard of ceremony, only a dark tunic and a certainty that made space for itself. "Please," he said to the room at large, voice warm enough to melt fear's edges. "Continue. I won't keep you long." Whispers rustled up like tall grass and wind. He walked the stations, bread, stews, the little garden of herbs by the window, nodding, listening. When he reached the table where Star chopped, he stopped as if he'd arrived at a country he hadn't known he'd been traveling toward. "There you are," he said. The knife stilled in her hand. The cook hurried into speech. "Your Majesty, the girl's mute. She doesn't know how to cause offense. I swear it. And if she—" "No offense," Damon said gently. Eyes on Star, not the apology layered over her. From this day, Star serves in my chambers. The kitchen inhaled like one body. Gossip woke up fully, and sprinted. The king turned to leave, then paused, as if remembering an afterthought that mattered too much to be an afterthought. He looked back at her one last time, and in his voice was the first beginning of something he had not yet dared to name. "Until this afternoon," he said softly. "Star." When he was gone, the room tried to pretend it hadn't seen a prophecy take its first step. Pans clanged. Dough thumped. Somewhere a kettle boiled over. Star stood a moment longer, hands shaking around a knife that had never felt so much like a promise. Above the kitchens, the palace shone itself awake, banners shivering, courtiers fastening laces and illusions. In the gardens, Wolfsbane nodded as if agreeing with a secret. Far out in the forests, 6 wolves lifted their heads to a wind that smelled of change, and the youngest of them, Liam, who had always laughed first, let out a low, wondering howl that didn't sound entirely like sorrow. And high in a chamber where fire learned her name, a king who had forgotten how to hope found that his wolf had not forgotten at all. The kitchens smelled of bread and fire and nerves. Pans hissed, wooden spoons clattered, and every servant moved with the desperation of people who feared being noticed. Yet all of that noise died the moment he walked in, the Alpha King, no crown, no retinue, just a black tunic damp from morning mist, and eyes that cut through the chatter like dawn cuts fog. "Please, continue," he said gently. Nobody did. Nova, Star, as they called her, stood at her station with a knife and a pile of carrots. The blade trembled in her hand. Though she prayed, no one noticed. She had slept less than 2 hours. The memory of last night, his voice, his gaze, the way he said, "Who are you?" kept replaying behind her eyelids like a dream that refused to fade. Her heart hadn't stopped beating fast since. The cook stepped forward, flustered. "Your Majesty, we weren't expecting... I wanted to see where my meals begin," Damon said, "and perhaps meet the people who make them." His tone was soft, but it carried the quiet command of a wolf used to obedience. He walked the length of the kitchen, pausing at tables, offering a nod here, a word there. The air followed him, rippling. When he reached Nova's table, the scent of ginger and steel mixed between them. His shadow fell across her hands. "There you are," he said again, like he'd been searching. Nova froze. She kept her eyes down, breath shallow. Maybe if she didn't move, he'd mistake her for another servant, another ghost in linen. But the cook spoke too quickly, too afraid. "Your Majesty, the girl means no harm. She's mute, poor thing. Has been since she came to us. Hard-working, loyal. She's harmless." Damon's silence stretched. Then softly, mute, he stepped closer. Nova could feel the heat from his body now, the weight of his attention like the edge of sunlight you can't look at too long. "Has she a name?" he asked. The cook cleared his throat. "We call her Star, Your Majesty. She looks up a lot. Spends nights in the gardens, I think. Dreams more than she speaks." A nervous laugh. "Though, of course, she doesn't speak at all." Damon's voice lowered. "Star." The word rolled through the air like a spell finding its target. Nova's throat tightened. He said it again, slower, tasting it. "Star, fitting." He reached out before she could move. 2 fingers touched her chin and lifted. For a moment, the world forgot how to exist. Her eyes met his. Every sound vanished. The crackle of fire, the murmur of fear, even her pulse seemed to stop. In his gaze, she saw not a king, not the wolf whose name commanded armies, but a man whose soul looked suddenly lost and found at the same time. "You never told me your name," he murmured. Her lips parted. No sound came. He smiled, small and dangerous. "That's all right. I think I already know." The cook bowed low, desperate to end the moment. "Your Majesty, if the girl's done something..." "She has," Damon interrupted softly. "She's reminded me what silence feels like." Then, turning to his steward, he said the words that would upend Nova's entire world. "From this day, Star will serve as my personal attendant." The knife slipped from her hand. It hit the table with a metallic gasp. The room exhaled in shock. "Your Majesty?" The steward sputtered. "That's highly irregular. She's untrained. She's observant, Damon said simply, and I prefer quiet. No one dared argue. The cook nodded too fast. The steward scribbled a note. And Nova, mute, trembling, disbelieving, stood as the Alpha King turned to her once more. Until this afternoon, he said, his tone softer now, almost intimate. Be ready, Star. He left, boots whispering against stone. The kitchen erupted in whispers the instant the door closed. Why her? She can't even speak. He must have seen something. No, he's cursed, he's gone mad. Nova didn't hear them. The room tilted around her, blurring at the edges. She pressed her palm against the table, steadying herself. Her life, once defined by silence, had just been rewritten by a single man's command. Hours later, she stood outside the royal chambers. The corridor was long and cold, lined with portraits of past kings whose eyes followed every step. Guards in black armor opened the door at her arrival. Beyond it, a study of shadows, books, and warm firelight. He sat at a desk, sleeves rolled up, writing with a feathered quill. When he looked up, she felt it in her bones. Enter, he said. Her feet moved on their own. She kept her gaze low, as was proper, but the scent of parchment and pine surrounded her. He gestured to the table beside him. Pour the tea. She obeyed, carefully, silently, but her hands shook just enough that the porcelain rattled. Still afraid of me? Damon asked, half smiling. She shook her head quickly, then froze, realizing how transparent she'd been. He chuckled under his breath. I don't bite. Not unless I'm provoked. Her breath caught. Something in his tone wasn't entirely a joke. He watched her for a long moment, studying the tilt of her shoulders, the way her hair fell to hide her face. Then he leaned back. How long have you served here? Nova hesitated, then lifted her fingers, tracing 9 lines against her palm. 9 years, he murmured. That long. His eyes softened. Then you've seen much. More than most. He rose, moving to the window. Sunlight edged his profile, painting him in gold. I wonder, he said quietly, what stories this palace would tell if its walls could speak. Or if its servants could. He turned, catching her gaze. Tell me, Star. What would yours say? She looked down quickly. Her fingers curled tight. It would tell you everything you're not ready to believe, she thought. That I'm no servant, but a princess hidden in rags. That the witch you dine with is my father's murderer. That my brothers howl under the same moon that blesses your crown. But all she did was bow, as silent as prayer. He sighed softly, the kind of sigh that sounds like surrender. Very well. Keep your secrets for now. He walked past her, stopping close enough that she could feel the heat of him. But know this, he said quietly. My wolf remembers your scent, and wolves do not forget. When the door closed behind him, Nova finally exhaled. Her knees went weak, her heart shaking like a trapped bird. She went to her small chamber that night with firelight still flickering in her mind, replaying his voice over and over until it hurt to breathe. And in the woods beyond the palace, 6 wolves raised their heads, sensing something shift, something ancient and magnetic, pulling fate toward its next breath. The room smelled of sandalwood and secrets. Evening shadows trembled along the stone walls as the firelight danced, licking the edges of a quiet too heavy to hold. Nova stood at the far end of the chamber, her hands folded neatly in front of her. Her new post, the Alpha King's personal attendant, had begun only 3 hours ago, and already she could feel the eyes of the palace piercing her back with envy and speculation. But none of them mattered now. Only he did. The door shut behind her, sealing the 2 of them inside a silence that throbbed like a heartbeat. Damon stood by the window, head bowed as twilight spilled across his shoulders. The golden strands of his hair caught the last of the dying light, making him look almost ethereal, part man, part myth, and every inch a king who carried the weight of nations. He didn't turn immediately when she entered. When he finally did, his gaze found her like a compass rediscovering north. You came. Just 2 words, but they felt like they rewrote her entire existence. Nova lowered her head, fingers tightening around the edge of her apron, The air between them stretched, fragile and charged. He moved closer, each step slow, deliberate. "You've been here 9 years, haven't you?" She nodded once. "And yet I've never seen you until last night," he said quietly. "It's strange, isn't it? How we can live beside ghosts and never know they were alive." He walked past her, the scent of pine and steel trailing him. Nova stood perfectly still, her heart thundering so loud she feared he could hear it. "I've asked around," Damon continued, pouring himself a glass of wine, though this time he didn't drink it. "They say you never speak. Not a sound. Not even in pain." He looked at her again. "Why?" Nova's throat tightened. Her lips parted instinctively, but nothing came. He watched her struggle for a moment, then smiled. But it wasn't mocking. It was tender. "As I thought," he murmured. "You've buried your voice deep." He turned his gaze toward the window, watching the horizon sink into indigo. "I understand the need to hide what the world doesn't deserve to hear." Nova's fingers twitched. Something about his tone, low, edged with fatigue, made her wonder what secrets he kept buried. The silence was broken only by the fire's crackle. Damon finally set the glass aside and moved toward her. He stopped close enough that the space between them filled with warmth and danger both. "When I look at you," he said softly, "I feel peace, and that frightens me." Nova blinked, startled. He laughed faintly, a sound that didn't belong to a king but to a man who had forgotten how to laugh properly. "Strange, isn't it? A servant who doesn't speak, and yet I find myself listening to her silence more than to the court's flattery." He took another step forward. She froze. Her breath brushed his chest. His scent, smoke, pine, and something darker, wrapped around her. Damon's voice dropped to a whisper. "Do I frighten you, Star?" She shook her head, slowly, truthfully. "Good," he said, "because the world outside this palace does. The council, the queen who arrived uninvited, they want something from me I can't give." His eyes met hers, and in them, Nova saw something raw, something almost human. "They'll destroy everything if I refuse." Nova's heart ached. Her fingers itched to write, to tell him the truth. That the queen he spoke of wasn't a queen at all, but the witch who had murdered her father, who had cursed her brothers, who was now trying to sink her claws into him. But she couldn't. Not yet. Not until all 6 shirts were complete. Her silence was her weapon, and her cage. The king turned away, pacing. "You remind me of someone," he said absently. "A face from a dream I can't quite remember. But the feeling?" He shook his head. "It's like I've known you all my life." Nova felt her pulse stutter. The mate bond was whispering. Faint, fragile, but real. He didn't understand it yet. The pull, the heat that came when their eyes met. But her wolf did, deep inside, under the human skin and the vow of silence. Her beast stirred for the first time in years, howling softly at the scent of its destined one. Damon noticed her sudden stillness. His brows drew together. "You're trembling." Nova stepped back quickly, clutching her hands together. But it was too late. He'd already seen the fear, the yearning, and something in him shifted. He didn't touch her, not yet. But his voice lowered to something unguarded, something dangerous. "You don't need to be afraid of me. I'm not your enemy." Nova looked up, meeting his eyes. For the first time, her gaze didn't flee. And what he saw there, quiet strength wrapped in pain, stole the breath from his chest. "Who hurt you?" he asked softly. "Who took your voice?" Her lips parted, trembling, the weight of 9 years pressing against her chest, desperate to break free. Then the sound of footsteps shattered the moment. The door opened sharply. A guard bowed. "Your Majesty, the Lady Morwin requests your presence in the Grand Hall. She insists it cannot wait." The king's expression hardened instantly. "Of course she does," he muttered. He looked back at Nova, his voice softer now. "Stay here. I won't be long." He left. The door closed behind him. Nova's trembling hands dropped to her sides. Her throat burned. She crossed to the window and stared into the gardens below, the same garden where the curse had almost found her last night. Far beyond the walls, a wolf's howl rose, faint but familiar. Her brothers were near, watching, waiting. She pressed her palm to the glass, whispering in her heart, "Soon, I promise." The fire behind her flickered as if answering, but she didn't. See the shadow standing at the corner of the courtyard, a woman in a blood-red gown, eyes gleaming like cut rubies. Morwin smiled thinly, her gaze fixed on the king's chamber window. "So," she whispered, "the silent one finally steps into the light." She turned, her smile widening into something wicked. Let's see how long silence survives fire. The castle didn't sleep that night. Not truly. Its corridors whispered, echoes of boots, gossip, and danger dressed as luxury. The chandeliers burned longer than they should have, dripping light like waxed gold. And somewhere between that light and the dark, she waited. Nova stood in the king's study, her hands pressed to the edge of the desk, her breath slow, steady, silent. The fire had dimmed, but its glow still traced the place where he had stood earlier. Close enough for her to smell the warmth of him. Close enough for her heart to betray the vow that still chained her. She tried not to think of the way he'd looked at her. The quiet, searching hunger in his eyes. The kind of look that found the truth even when you buried it beneath years of silence. But there was no time for that now. The last of the 6 shirts lay waiting under her bed. One sleeve short of freedom. One stitch away from breaking 9 years of silence. She needed to finish it before dawn, before the witch realized who she was, before fate turned its cruel head toward her again. Yet tonight, something in the air felt wrong. Heavy, watching. The candle nearest the window flickered, though there was no wind. Nova turned slowly. Outside, the courtyard was still. The trees stood like sentinels, their leaves motionless under a suffocating sky. And then, she saw her, a woman in red, standing where the moonlight couldn't reach. Lady Morwin, the witch of Silverrest, the serpent in a queen's skin. Her silver hair caught the light, glinting like a blade. Even from behind the glass, Nova felt her power, a slow, poisonous heat that slid beneath the skin. Morwin lifted her gaze, and for the first time in 9 years, their eyes met. The witch smiled. Nova's stomach turned to stone. The same smile. The same look she'd worn when her father's heart had stopped mid-beat. Morwin raised a single finger to her lips. Shh! And then vanished into the shadows. Nova stumbled back, clutching the desk to steady herself. She knew what that meant. The witch knew. The next morning, the castle bloomed with tension. The king's council gathered early, called by a messenger with trembling hands. Morwin had requested an audience, uninvited, but no one refused her. Nova dressed quietly, head bowed, eyes lowered, and yet every step through the palace corridors felt heavier. She could feel the witch's presence everywhere, in the air, in the cold smile of the courtiers, in the sudden silence that fell whenever her name was spoken. When she reached the hall, she paused in the shadows. The doors stood open. Gold light spilled out. Inside, Damon sat at the high table, every inch a king. But the calm in his jaw was strained, his hand curled tight against the armrest. His wolf was restless. Nova could sense it even from across the room. And across from him, Lady Morwin stood in crimson. Every step she took was poetry wrapped around venom. "Your Majesty," she said sweetly, "I bring you a gift." A guard stepped forward, carrying a tray. Upon it, a vial. Small, crystal, filled with shimmering blue liquid. Damon's brow furrowed. A potion? A remedy, she said, her smile pure and poisonous. To strengthen your heart, you've seemed distracted lately. Nova's pulse quickened. Distraction, she'd noticed it too. His wolf had been unsettled since the night he met her, drawn to her in ways he couldn't explain. Morwin turned slowly, eyes sweeping the room, until they landed on Nova. There, she said, almost purring. The new servant, the mute girl who seems to occupy your every hour. Murmurs rippled through the court. Damon's jaw tensed. She is under my protection. Protection? Morwin's voice softened, feigned innocence. Or affection. The court gasped. The witch smiled. Damon rose from his seat, his height commanding the room's silence. Careful, my lady. Morwin's eyes gleamed. I mean no offense, your majesty. Only curiosity. She tilted her head, studying Nova as though she were a puzzle piece that didn't belong. She doesn't speak, doesn't write, doesn't serve the gods you serve. How do you know she's not cursed? Nova's breath caught. The room turned cold. The witch was clever, too clever. She wasn't simply here to poison his blood. She wanted to poison his faith. Damon looked at Nova. For a heartbeat, doubt flashed, behind his eyes. Not because he believed the witch, but because he feared the possibility. He knew too well the dangers of magic that hides behind beauty. Enough, he said at last. Your words test my patience, Lady Morwin. She bowed slightly, her smile never fading. Forgive me, my king. I only wish to serve. Her gaze slid back to Nova one last time. But mark my words, not every silence is sacred. Some hide the screams of monsters. She turned and swept from the hall, leaving a chill in her wake. That night, the storm came. Thunder rolled across the sky like a promise. The wind clawed at the palace walls. Nova sat by her candle, her needle trembling in her hand. She was so close, one sleeve left. The sixth and final shirt, each stitch a heartbeat, each thread a prayer. The storm howled, the candle guttered, then the door creaked open. She turned and found him there. The Alpha King. Rain slicked his hair to his forehead, his tunic clung to his chest, and his eyes burned gold in the half-light. You weren't in the servants' quarters, he said, voice low. I went looking. Nova stood, heart hammering. She tried to step back, but the wall stopped her. Damon closed the door behind him. She's dangerous, he said. Morwin. Whatever game she's playing, I won't let her win. But you... He stopped, words breaking against emotion. Every time I look at you, he whispered, I feel something I don't understand. My wolf calls your name, even though you've never spoken it. He took another step. The storm outside cracked lightning across the glass, illuminating them both. Tell me I'm wrong, he said, his voice a plea. Tell me you don't feel it too. Nova's throat tightened painfully. The words clawed at her chest, 9 years of silence begging to shatter. She wanted to scream yes, to tell him everything. Who she was, what she'd done, why she could never speak. But the curse coiled around her tongue like iron. Tears spilled silently down her cheeks. He reached up and wiped one away, his touch gentle but burning. Whoever hurt you, he murmured. I swear they'll never touch you again. The thunder swallowed his vow. Outside, unseen beyond the rain, Morwin stood at her window, watching the flicker of candlelight in the king's chambers. Her lips curled. So the wolf has chosen, she whispered. How poetic. She lifted the vial of blue liquid and poured a single drop into her own palm. It hissed against her skin like acid. Let's see how strong fate truly is when love drinks poison. The storm had not stopped. It clawed at the windows and roared through the rafters like an angry beast, shaking the castle to its bones. But inside the king's chamber, silence ruled. Thick, fragile, dangerous. Nova stood before the Alpha King, her breath trembling in her chest. His hand still lingered near her face where he had brushed away her tears. The warmth of his touch burned like sunlight after a lifetime of winter. Damon looked at her as if she were both salvation and curse. His eyes, gold-rimmed with shadow, searched hers for an answer she couldn't give. "Why can't you speak?" he asked softly. "What are you afraid of?" Nova's lips parted, trembling. Her throat ached with the weight of words buried alive for 9 long years. She tried. Gods, she tried. The truth rose like a scream inside her chest. But the curse was merciless. A sharp pain lashed across her throat, unseen but real, sealing the words before they could escape. She gasped. Her knees hit the floor. "Star!" Damon dropped beside her instantly, his hands on her shoulders. "What's wrong?" She shook her head violently, tears spilling down. She couldn't tell him. Not yet. Not until the last shirt was finished. Not until her brothers were free. He didn't understand. How could he? All he saw was a girl collapsing beneath the ghost she refused to share. He lifted her gently, carried her to the bed, and sat beside her. "Breathe," he whispered. "You don't need words," but she did. She needed to tell him that the witch was here. That the same woman who cursed her family now hunted him. That the very air he breathed was poisoned with her magic. And while she struggled to breathe through her silence, Morwin moved through the corridors like a serpent wrapped in silk. The witch's steps were quiet, deliberate. The hem of her crimson gown whispered secrets to the stone. She carried a silver goblet in her hand, filled with the same shimmering blue potion she had shown the court earlier that morning. But this time, it wasn't for show. This time, it was for him. Guards bowed as she passed. No one dared question her presence. After all, she had charmed half the court and promised the rest what they desired most: power. When she reached the king's chamber door, she smiled. Not the smile of a woman, the smile of a predator. She lifted her hand and knocked softly. Once. Twice. Damon looked up. "Enter," he called, unaware of the storm about to enter his life. Nova's eyes widened when she saw who stood at the threshold. Her entire body went rigid, every muscle screaming danger. "My lady," Damon said, surprised but polite. "It's late," Morwin bowed gracefully. "Forgive my intrusion, your majesty, but I feared for your rest. The storm is fierce tonight. I brought something to calm your nerves." She lifted the goblet, smiling sweetly. Nova's heart stopped. The liquid shimmered like broken stars, the same poison she had seen before. She stumbled to her feet, shaking her head frantically, waving her hands in warning. The king frowned. "Star?" She pointed to the goblet, then to Morwin, then shook her head violently. Morwin tilted her head with mock sympathy. "The poor creature doesn't trust me, it seems. How strange. I've always admired the loyalty of your servants." "Enough," Damon said firmly. "You'll have me believe the girl can sense danger better than my own guards?" Morwin's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Sometimes kings trust the wrong hearts." Nova moved before she could think, crossed the room, her bare feet silent on the stone. She reached for the goblet, but Morwin stepped aside too quickly, her motion graceful, serpent smooth. "Oh, little mute," the witch purred. "You remember me, don't you?" Nova froze. The king's eyes narrowed. "You know her?" Morwin's smile widened. "She should. I knew her family." Her voice turned to silk and venom. "Tell me, your majesty, have you ever wondered why this girl never speaks? Why her eyes carry the weight of 10,000 ghosts?" Damon's wolf stirred beneath his skin, restless, protective. "Explain," he demanded. Morwin circled them both like a shadow made flesh. "She's cursed, my king. Bound by magic older than your throne. Her silence is not purity, it's payment. And you," she pointed a crimson-tipped finger at him, "you are the fool she will destroy next." The room fell still. Nova shook her head violently, tears spilling. She wanted to scream, Lies, lies! But her throat burned with invisible chains. Damon stepped between them, his voice low and sharp. You've overstepped, Lady Morwin. The witch's laughter was soft, melodic, terrible. Have I? She tossed the goblet at his feet. The blue liquid splattered across the marble, hissing where it touched the air. The scent of iron filled the room. Damon looked down, and realization dawned in his eyes. He turned back to Nova slowly. She was trying to poison me, he said, voice hoarse. And you knew? Nova nodded desperately. You tried to warn me. Another nod. Tears streaked her cheeks. Something inside him broke, and something else took its place. He stepped closer, his hand rising to her cheek. I doubted you, he whispered. Even for a moment. I'll never forgive myself for that. Then his voice hardened as he turned to the witch. Guards! But the door slammed shut before they could enter. Morwin lifted her hands, and the air itself twisted. The fire roared higher, burning blue. The shadows deepened, bending toward her like servants. You think chains and crowns can stop me? She hissed. You took my kingdom, my throne, my vengeance, and now I will take yours. She raised her palm. Light burst from it, aimed at the king's chest. Nova didn't think. She moved. The spell struck her instead. The force flung her across the room, slamming her into the wall. Her body crumpled, the air leaving her lungs in a shudder. Damon roared, the sound not entirely human. His wolf surged forward, golden fire flooding his veins. His eyes glowed like twin suns. He charged. The witch screamed as he crashed into her, claws shredding her magic mid-spell. Sparks flew. The room shook. Enough, she shrieked. You would destroy your own soul for a cursed girl? I'd destroy the world for her. With one final burst of power, Damon slammed her back against the stone column. The witch vanished in a burst of violet smoke. Retreating. Not dead. Not yet. When the air cleared, the room was chaos, the scent of burnt magic heavy as blood. Damon turned. Nova lay motionless on the floor, her hair spread like ink across the marble. He fell to his knees beside her. Star, please! Her chest rose weakly, barely. Her lips parted, and for the first time in 9 years, sound broke through her silence. Mon. The single word shattered him. He caught her hand, pressing it against his heart. I'm here, Star. Her tears slipped silently down her face. She wanted to tell him everything. Her brothers, her curse, her vow. But darkness was already claiming her edges. The king gathered her in his arms, his voice breaking. Don't you dare leave me now. Outside, the storm finally began to fade, replaced by the slow roll of dawn. But in the corner of the shattered room, the spilled poison shimmered one last time, then began to crawl back toward the door, alive with intent. And far beyond the palace walls, 6 wolves lifted their heads to the sunrise, howling for the sister whose silence had just broken. The first light of dawn crept across the palace like a whisper. Soft, golden, unassuming, it did not know it was shining upon a battlefield. The night had ended, but the storm it left behind still lingered in the air. Cracked walls, scorched stone, the faint scent of magic burned raw. The Alpha King knelt in the center of the ruin, the woman he loved in his arms. Nova's skin was pale, her breath shallow but steady. The glow of spent magic still shimmered faintly beneath her veins like threads of silver. Every rise and fall of her chest was a victory, every heartbeat a defiance. Damon brushed a strand of hair from her face, his hands trembling. He had fought wars. He had faced death in every form it took, but never had fear felt like this. So fragile, so human, so completely consuming. Star, he whispered, his voice breaking. If you leave me now, there'll be nothing left to rule. Her lips parted, barely moving. You were never mine to keep, she breathed. He bent lower, pressing his forehead to hers. Then let me be yours to protect. Her lashes fluttered, tears slipping free. She had spent 9 years in silence. And now, when her voice finally returned, Every word was heavier than 1,000 spells. Outside the chamber, the palace had awakened to chaos. Guards scrambled to restore order. Servants whispered of curses, fire, and shadows moving on their own, and somewhere beyond the noise. The witch watched. Morwin stood at the edge of the courtyard, her crimson gown tattered, her silver hair wild. Rage burned behind her eyes, deep and ancient. The spell she'd cast had not killed the girl. That she could not forgive. "She speaks now," she hissed into the morning air, "and the moment she does, my centuries of work begin to crumble." She turned toward the horizon, toward the dark forest that stretched like a scar across the land. "Then let her brothers watch her burn with their own eyes," she whispered. And with a curl of smoke, she was gone. Nova stirred, pain threading through every nerve. The world came back to her in fragments. The scent of ash, the warmth of the king's hand, the soft murmur of his voice. "Rest," he said gently when her eyes flickered open. "You're safe now, safe." The word stung. She pushed herself up, ignoring the ache that spread through her body. "No," she whispered. "We're not safe." "She's still here." Damon's jaw tightened. "The witch! She'll come for you again," Nova said. "For your crown and your soul. She'll finish what she started with my father." Damon looked at her sharply. "Your father?" For a heartbeat, silence hung between them. And then she spoke. Really spoke. The truth she'd swallowed for nearly a decade. "My name isn't Star," she said, her voice trembling yet clear. "It's Nova, Princess Nova of Silverrest. My father was King Kai's, the man she murdered. The witch who calls herself queen killed him, and cursed my brothers to live as wolves." Damon rose slowly, disbelief warring with the raw certainty in her eyes. "You're the lost princess," he breathed. "The one they said perished in the rebellion." Nova nodded. "I lived, but only because I stayed silent. The curse bound my tongue. If I spoke before the 6 shirts were finished, my brothers would remain beasts forever." She turned her palms upward. The faint shimmer of Wolfsbane threads still marked her skin, scarred from years of weaving magic into fabric. "I broke my vow last night," she whispered. "I spoke your name to save you." Her voice cracked. "And now I've doomed them." Damon knelt before her, taking her shaking hands in his. "No," he said fiercely. "You saved me. You saved us. And I swear on the moon that I will not let your sacrifice go in vain." But even as he spoke, the sound of distant howls filled the morning air. 6 voices. 6 brothers, each one carried pain. Each one carried warning. Nova's head jerked toward the window. She's found them. The forest waited like a grave. Mist curled through the ancient trees as the witch stepped into the clearing, her crimson gown dragging over roots and bones. Before her, 6 enormous wolves crouched, fur bristling, teeth bared. But even beasts recognized true evil when they saw it. "You poor creatures," Morwin said softly, "still bound by the foolish love of a sister who refuses to die." The eldest wolf growled, silver fur glinting like lightning. "You can snarl all you wish, Caden," she purred. "But when the sun sets, your sister's heart will stop, and your curse will be sealed forever." The air trembled around her, charged with dark magic. And in that same moment, in the castle, Nova collapsed. Her hand clutched her chest, pain radiating like fire. She's killing them through me," she gasped. Damon didn't hesitate. "Then we end this, together." He scooped her up, ignoring the protests of his guards. "Ready my horse, now." The king's voice was thunder. Within moments, the courtyard erupted into motion. Armor clattering, gates opening, banners snapping in the wind. Nova clung to him as they rode into the dawn, the wind tearing through her hair, the forest drawing closer with every heartbeat. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "If I die before I finish the last shirt, you won't. You don't understand," she insisted. "It's not just a curse. It's a binding of blood. If my brothers fall, if I fail, she'll drain the power of our entire bloodline." He looked down at her, his jaw hardening. "Then let her try. She'll have to go through me first. The forest loomed ahead. Dark, endless, alive. The scent of smoke reached them before the screams did. When they entered the clearing, Damon reined his horse to a stop. Morwin stood in the center, power swirling around her like a hurricane. The wolves circled her, weakened but unbroken. The moment she saw Nova, her smile spread wide and cruel. "Ah, the princess returns. How touching." Damon set Nova down gently, drawing his blade. The metal sang in the air. "Step away from them, witch," Morwin laughed. "You think steel can cut what is immortal?" "No," Damon said, his voice dropping to a growl. "But wolf fire can." His eyes flared gold, his wolf bursting forth, half-shifted, raw and divine. Magic rippled across the clearing, the power of an alpha king unleashed in full. Morwin staggered back as Damon advanced, his aura burning bright enough to set the grass aflame. But Nova wasn't watching him. She was watching her brothers, their forms flickering, fading, caught between wolf and man. She dropped to her knees, dragging the last shirt from her satchel. It was unfinished, one sleeve still loose, one row incomplete. Her fingers flew, weaving faster than human hands should move. "Keep her safe," she cried out, her voice breaking. The eldest wolf, Caden, lunged at Morwin, claws flashing. The others joined him, 6 streaks of silver fury. The witch screamed, her magic flaring like lightning. "You cannot break what I have bound." "Then I'll unbind it with my blood," Nova whispered. Her needle slipped, slicing her palm. Blood beaded, crimson and brilliant. It soaked into the Wolfsbane threads, turning silver to scarlet. The air trembled. A wind rose from the ground itself, swirling around her like a storm. Damon turned, eyes wide. "Nova, what are you doing?" She looked up at him, tears and determination in equal measure. "Ending it." With the final stitch, the shirt burst into light. It wasn't just silver this time. It was every color of the dawn. Gold, violet, white. The magic ripped through the clearing, a shockwave that flung Morwin backward, tearing the crown from her head. The wolves fell to the ground, writhing, their bodies consumed by light. When the brilliance faded, they rose, no longer beasts but men. Kings reborn. The eldest reached out a trembling hand. "Sister!" But Nova was falling. Her magic, her life, had been the final cost of the spell. Damon caught her before she touched the ground. "No," he choked. "Stay with me," she smiled faintly. "You have your kingdom back. Your people. Don't mourn me." He shook his head, pressing her hand against his chest. "If I lose you, I lose everything." She lifted her palm weakly to his cheek. "Then let me live there," her voice faltered. Her body went limp. For a long moment, the forest was silent. Then Damon bowed his head and howled. The sound split the sky. It was rage and grief, love and promise. The howl of a king who refused to surrender to fate. And the moon heard him. Light descended once more, gentle this time, silver and pure. It flowed from the sky into the girl's still form, into the threads of her magic, into the bond that had never truly broken. Her chest rose again, once, twice, and when she opened her eyes, they were glowing with soft silver fire. Damon stared, awe and relief colliding in his heart. "Nova?" Her smile was faint but real. "The silence is over," she whispered. "It's time to speak. Together." He pulled her into his arms, laughter and tears mingling as the dawn broke fully overhead. The wolves, her brothers, stood behind them, proud and free. The witch's crown lay forgotten in the dirt, and as sunlight spilled through the trees, catching in Nova's silver hair, one truth echoed through every heart that witnessed it. The curse was broken. The silence had ended, and the Queen of Wolves had risen,